Welcome to the Call to Farms podcast, a place where we explore the journey of food and farming. From our farm to your table, I'm your host, Tim Ing, along with my wife, Sophie.
Hey, friends.
And we are on a mission to inspire, educate, and connect you with stories from other local farmers and other real food enthusiasts of all kinds in pursuit of true nourishment.
Hey, friends. Today we're so excited to bring on Chef James Berry. Chef James and our family met, I want to say, 2 years ago at Polyface Farms, Joel Salatin's farm, at Maureen's event, God's Good Table event. And we talked about nose to tail cooking, and it was so inspiring and so fun. I remember when Chef James had a whole beef tongue and he had it out for everybody to display, and everyone just had a great time. But I wanted to give you a quick overview of Chef James. James Berry has 20 years in the culinary field. He started as a private chef cooking for celebrities such as Tom Cruz, George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Sean Puffy Combs, Mariska Hargitay of Law and Order SVI, Barbra Streisand, and John Cusack. Most recently, James launched his first functional food product, Pluck, a Oregon-based seasoning company. And you guys, you have heard me talk about this product if you've seen me doing any cooking demos. It's the first of its kind and an amazingly easy and delicious way for people to get organ meats into their diet. All ages of our family love it, from grandparents to the children, and they don't even know that they're eating organ-based seasoning. James is also a published cookbook author, having co-authored the books in Margaret Floyd's book, Eat Naked, and co-authored the follow-up cookbook, The Naked Foods Cookbook. He most recently co-authored the recipes in Dr. Alejandro Junger's book, Clean 7, and we're so excited to have Chef James here on the show with us today. Chef James, welcome to the show.
San Jose in the house.
That's right.
Right. East Side represent.
Yes, I should share that when we all met, we realized that we're all from San Jose, California.
Well,
That's right.
I think he was on the west side. You're from
Right,
the
okay.
west side, Chef.
No, I'm from the east side. I'm from
Okay,
East
all right.
San Jose.
East Side.
Okay.
We made it out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was so hard. Not, yeah.
So, Chef James, tell us a little bit about yourself. We always kick off and ask all of our guests to tell us a story about how they answered the call to farms in the pursuit of true, real food and nourishment.
You know, I think it's through contrast. My household was such that we knew dinner was ready because the smoke detector went off. It was like my mom was not a chef. My dad's not really either. But luckily, though, they did make food from scratch. So, you know, growing up, we had our meat. We did have mostly frozen vegetables because that was the thing then, you know, in the 70s. And then we'd have like a baked potato or something like that too. So, but I always think of the plate that kind of looked like the 50s, kind of a plate that it would look like in the 50s. Like I felt like even though I was born in the 70s, I felt like I ate like 1950s diner or something like that. But I learned to scramble an egg at 7, and I was just hooked on, you know, cooking, and immediately took to it. Started reading it for pleasure. Took culinary classes in junior high school, as many as I could, and it was my best class. Like I clearly just gravitated right to it. But for some reason at that age, I didn't think that it was a career. Like I thought, oh, if you're going to be a chef, you got to work nights. And I didn't want to work nights. For some reason at the age of 10, I was like, I'm a family man and I don't want to work at nights. I have no idea why, but that was the reality. And so I kind of just said, well, this is going to be a hobby, and got into my 30s, and 9/11 had happened. And I was like, you know, life is precious. We don't know when our time is up. And I just decided right then and there I was going to audit my life and only do the things that had heart, like the things that I was truly passionate about. And there were some things that I was substitute teaching in the LA Unified at the time, and I was really just doing it as bill paying. I didn't care for it, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to change that. I'm going to go to culinary school and do that. And I knew I didn't want to like work or own a restaurant. I wanted a private chef. And so I found a school in New York that was very well known for healthy cooking called the Natural Gourmet Institute. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was expensive and I had to really work to save up for it, but it was one of those schools that gave back 500 times. Like every time someone from LA called looking for a private chef, they referred me every time. And so I just quickly built my resume to some of the names you mentioned. And then I started a meal delivery service because I realized I was cooking for Tom Cruz, actually. I cooked for him for about 2 years. And there were a lot of people that got let go of through those 2 years because it was a really hard job. I mean, he's a great person, but it's a very demanding job. And a lot of people came and went. I think it was myself and maybe like Katie's assistant because he was married to Katie Holmes at the time. And I think it was her assistant and maybe the house manager. I think the three of us were the only ones that were there consistently through the 2 years or more. But I left this very solid job, very well paying job because I was like, I'm here to help more than just the 1%. I knew that the way I was cooking for people was helping. I had other clients that had struggled to lose their baby weight, for example, had struggled with chronic illness, and once they started eating my food, it started to go away. And so I knew that I could help more than just Tom Cruise. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna start a business that will make it more accessible. Now I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I knew how to cook. I didn't know how to run a business. And I spent the next 8 years kind of learning, but oh my goodness, it was hard. It was really, really hard, challenging. But
Sure.
then I left LA, sold that business, didn't make much money, but I just had to get out because I was so swallowed by it. And then I was a stay-at-home dad for about 5 years. And during that time, I got my health back, I got more sleep, I got my creativity back, and that's when I came up with Pluck.
Wow. Chef James, can you go into a little bit more detail because that was a great overview, and I'm just curious because a lot of people I know who are fascinated and interested in cooking and want to go to culinary school. You made it sound like you just went to like this really top school, but what's the process like to get into it? Do you already have to have years of experience like on your resume in order to get accepted into natural gourmet school?
Well, that program doesn't exist as it did when I went to it. It now is folded into this ICE program in New York. But no, you don't have to, it's not like film school where you have to submit, a short film and hope that they like it or anything like that, or write an essay. You really just have to, you apply and you hope that they have room for you. But if they have room, I'm pretty sure they'll take you. And usually culinary schools are expensive because you're covering the cost of all the food that you're going to be preparing in the class, all the kitchen spaces, all that stuff. So they can be costly, and some of them vary between, a year to 2 years. And the one I did though was accelerated program, and it was there for 4 to 5 months, I think. But it was like every day. And I think if anything, what I would offer is that if you're interested in cooking, that yes, you can go to a school, and I do recommend it. I think you learn a lot in a culinary program. But what you don't learn is how to be fast and efficient.
Hmm.
And so the way to do that is to actually work in an environment that forces you to be fast and efficient. And so I did this Vans Warp Tour. Have you guys ever heard of that? It's like a music festival. I don't know if they still do it anymore, but it used to be annual. It was a big event. We did 50 cities in 60 days. Like we traveled all through the US and even into Canada. And it was a massive festival. And I did that specifically so that I could learn to be a better chef because I knew that I'd only learned so much in school. And so I got offered the gig to be the vegan vegetarian chef on the Vans Warp Tour. And I was like, let's do it, it was some of the hardest work I've ever done. It was really, really challenging, but it absolutely made me a better chef. So you really do want to put yourself in scenarios that, particularly if you're going to spend all that money to go to culinary school, because most people that go do not become chefs. So right away, I would first get a job where you're like a short order cook just to see if you even like it. It doesn't mean you'll do it forever, but just make sure that you don't mind making the same food over and over, and that it's, that you don't mind kind of working in very on your feet all day, because it is exhausting in very hot temperature kitchens, and that you don't mind, the kind of pirate like characteristics that come with being a chef. A lot of chefs are not healthy. A lot of chefs are maxed out, like they work really long hours, really late hours. They don't go to bed till like 2 or 3 or 4, and so it's just not a healthy lifestyle. So you really want to make sure that you're specific about what you want to get out of it.
That's interesting. I love your advice on working in environments that stretch you. One of the things that I did when we were just starting our business, we had a self-serve frozen yogurt shop, and we were bringing in espresso, like with boba specifically, like with espresso. And I remember I had applied to work the early shift for Starbucks. And it was specifically because I'm like, I want people to yell at me. I want people at the 5 a.m. when the doors open and there are people and the machines are blaring. Like, I didn't want to take the cash register. I'm like, I'll be behind the machines and I need to learn this, the level of efficiency
Mhm.
and productivity and the pressure. But I'm curious.
Wow.
Yeah, that was in our 20s though. That was forever
Did
ago.
you, I mean, did you get out of it what you had hoped?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then I took all the skills back to our self-serve frozen yogurt shop and then trained the employees with that because, on one hand, like I needed to learn this and I could take like a bartending class or I could take an espresso school, but there's nothing to replace that experience that you could get hands-on when the pressure's on and not from the cost that would have cost us to make the mistakes from our own customers. Like I would rather take the hit from someone else's customers and learn on the job that way.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it. I mean, I think if you really want to real life experience is going to give you more education. But the reason why I would choose, if let's say you want to become a chef, why I would choose a specific culinary program is less for the education and more for the contacts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And because I know a lot of chefs who go down the path of saying like, "Oh, I actually want to be a private chef," but then they go to like the Culinary Institute or something like that. And at the time, back in the day, 20 years ago, those programs were churning out chefs for restaurants.
Hmm.
And so if I met a chef that went to one of those programs and they're like, "Oh, I want to be a private chef," they literally had no clue on how to get into it, nor did they get any referrals because no one was calling those schools for private chefs.
Mm.
Mm.
They might be now, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
20 years ago, they were not. And so I really advise if anyone's thinking of going on that path is find someone that you can have as a mentor. Like when I first, I mean, probably up to about 15 years ago, I was a constant mentor to people that were getting into the private chef industry because that's an industry that there's no school that really teaches you to be a private chef. There's no kind of blueprint on what to charge, how to do it. It's its own kind of talent. And I had, when I first got out of culinary school, I found someone who was already doing it, who mentored me. And so
Mm.
I kind of paid it forward and done that for others. But I highly recommend if anyone goes down that route to find a mentor, because you'll make so many mistakes and you don't have to. If you just talk to someone who's done it already, they'll get you so much further ahead than you would be otherwise.
That's so true about mentorship. I want to know just for purely selfish reasons, but how does Tom Cruise eat? What dietary principles does he follow?
Whatever I cooked. No, I mean, that is kind of, I mean, I'm joking, but also there's truth that what was my power as a chef was that I didn't just come to cook good food. Like I came with a very conscious nutritional background. Like even when it was really interesting. So I got out of culinary school and I had, I was in my 30s, right? So I was used to getting paid, 20, $25 an hour. Like I was not getting minimum wage at that age. And I got out, I did my internship at this rehab center in Malibu and they offered me a job and it was for $9 an hour. And I got off the phone and I was crying to myself. I was like, I cannot believe I'm in my 30s. I have friends who I grew up with who are like lawyers and they're like buying houses. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm getting offered a job for $9 an hour. There's no way I can survive off of that. And I was destitute about it. I was like, what did I just do? Did I just embrace a career that's not gonna, I'm not gonna be able to survive on? And what's so interesting is that I think the next day I got a call from a woman who had gotten my information from the school I went to, and she's, "Hey, we're looking for a private chef." And she starts telling me what they're looking for, and she's like, "Well, we want them, we want you to cook with no fat, and we want you to do this and that." And it was like very kind of like stereotype of what a diet should be, like what diet food should look like and taste like and all that stuff. And I was just like, here I am, even though I'm desperate, and want a good job. I was like, well, I can't do that. I literally turned her down. And she was like, well, wait, what are you talking about? Like, why? And I said, well, that's just not how I cook. I don't believe in what you're saying. I don't believe that's how we get healthy. And she said, well, what do you believe?
Mm.
And so I started telling her, I said, well, I believe that you should be making everything from scratch. I believe that it should have fat, like regular animal fat. You should be eating animal products. You should be eating some vegetables, but you should be minimizing, the ultra processed foods and sugars and things like that. And after I shared what I said to her, she said, okay, well, we'll do what you said. And I got my first client. And that is how I've been from day one, obviously, but even to this day, like when people come to me and they say, "Will you private chef for me?" I tell them, "Well, this is what I do. I don't mold myself to them. They mold to me." And it's not because I'm like on a soapbox about it, but it's more of like I truly believe that it's not about following a specific diet. It's just about eating nutrient dense real food. And as long as things are made from scratch and I'm controlling the ingredients, the people will feel better. I mean, that's why when you go to Europe, you go to any kind of place where they're making things locally and they're not outsourcing things from, ultra processed foods, but they're actually making them from scratch. They're using local produce and product that you feel better eating it.
And did that come from your time at the culinary school, or did you already come in with those principles before?
I think it was a mix of yes, that is some of the principles I got from the school. Like that's actually, when I went to the school, that's when I first learned about Weston A. Price. That it was at that school that was one of the suggested readings was their book, and I bought it there and everything, and I was very enthralled by it and curious, and I learned all about organ meats and soaking your grains and your nuts and seeds, and I was doing a lot of that stuff. Now I wasn't what's interesting is that I didn't leave the program going like, okay, now I'm going to start cooking organ meats, but I did leave it like soaking and properly preparing food, like making my own cultured vegetables, like culturing my own product and soaking the grains and just sprouting things when I could, things like that. And it wasn't until much later did I actually go, well, wait a second, like, why am I not doing the organ meat piece? Because that's the most nutrient dense food on the planet. And like, I know I didn't grow up eating it, but I got to figure out how to incorporate that into what I'm doing. And I think it was really having kids that actually pushed me that direction. Cause I was like, oh, now it's not just me. And I gotta help my kids get these foods into their diet and not have it be like a picky eating kind of thing or an issue around that. So that was kind of interesting, but it definitely, the school got me in, but I do also think it was like, here I am, I'm 30 years old, so I was a little bit more grounded than like a 22-year-old, I was a little bit more like, yeah, I think I know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to stand up for what my experiences have been.
And back then, I mean, it's probably what, 20 years ago. Did the concept of eating more of the Weston A. Price nourishing traditions, was that widely accepted
Oh,
in
no.
the okay,
Not at
yeah.
all. I mean, you can talk to even Sally or Joel, all of them, like, they'll be like, yeah, it's like we're all still outliers. Those Western pricers, those of us that do that, it's like we're all still outliers, which is so absurd. When I've talked to Joel about it, I'm like, Joel, now that you've been around for as long as you have, now that your farm is a proof of that it works, that your principles work, are you getting the respect you deserve? And he's like, no, they just say that it's well, they just complain that my acreage is only so big, and so of course it works on that, but that if I was 10,000 acres, it wouldn't work. And I'm just like, that's just lame. It's just stupid. Like, but yeah, that was what's interesting is when, I'm acting like, oh, well, it's my way or the highway when I got out of culinary school. But the reality is that I did have to compromise with clients. Like they would say, I would get in the door, but then there might be a trending book. Like when I first got out of culinary school, it was like the Fat Flesh Diet. That was the hot book at the time. And so my first client said, "Oh, can you make it based on the Fat Flesh Diet?" And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't even know what that was. So I had to read the book. I had to practice the recipes, and I had to like get good at it, and not just understand it, but get good at it. But I still did it my way. I mean, I still did everything from scratch, and I would still look at the recipes. And I do this even to this day. Like when I read a cookbook and I look at recipes from any source, I kind of just I get instincts, you know what I mean? Like when I'm reading, I'm like, I think that I should do this instead or that instead, and I just follow my instincts with it because I've learned to trust them.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing that I mean, that's even kind of how I came up with Pluck. It's like as I've gotten older, I don't talk about this that much, but I really do believe that our instincts are our gold. Like our instincts, if no matter what you believe in, that they're our instincts are kind of the word of God in a sense, and that it's it's your uniqueness, and it's possibly coming from another source, but it's that source talking through you and coming out, and it's like it's truly what differentiates any of us is your instincts and my instincts. And I believe part of the path of anyone should be to learn to follow your instincts because they're probably what's going to be best for you over someone else's opinion of what they think you should do.
Chef James, has your cooking evolved like over the times with doing private chef cooking and now with Pluck? Actually, let me back up a little bit. Now that you do Pluck, do you do any more private cooking? Do you still get to be a chef, or are you just primarily in the Pluck?
That's such a funny question. I mean, it's a great question, but I mean, it's just so funny because depending on when you talk to me about it, I probably would answer differently. I recently did a private chef job, but if you talked to me last year, I would have been like, no, I haven't done one in a while. But I recently did one. And it was mostly because it was like it came from a referral from a friend of mine who you mentioned, Dr. Alejandro Younger. He has a few different New York Times best-selling books, but one of them is called Clean, and he kind of came on the scene for detoxing. But we became friends when he was first developing that, and he's just a wonderful soul. And we've always kind of collaborated on things, over the years, where if he has a high profile client, he'll refer them to me, I'll help them, and it just serves everybody. And so he referred me to somebody who was in Paris who was looking for some support, and the pay was right, the adventure was there, and it wasn't so time consuming that was going to take away from my family for too long. So it kind of checked all the boxes, and I did it, and it was really fun. Like I was beautiful being in that position again. I hadn't done it in a while, and it was nice to work those muscles. And I'm really glad that I did it. And I'll probably continue to do it every few years because I don't want to lose that muscle. But I mostly cook for my family at this point, or when we have dinner parties. My family jokes though, particularly my wife, I should say, that the life that people think that a family of a chef would have, she's like, we don't have that life. Like for the most part, he does very simple things, and sometimes it's even overcooked and da 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 da. Like she's gonna laugh that it's like, oh, you burned the broccoli, like because I wasn't paying attention or whatever. But when I turn it on, which they're always trying to get me to turn it on, or like if we have dinner parties, they're like, oh, now he's gonna turn it on. Then they're like, oh, now this is the life of a family
Yeah.
who's
I
chef.
That's why I asked you originally, because when you start talking about instincts, then it made me think about the military and how some of my classmates, they went on the fly and be a pilot, but then they get to a certain point in their career where they get grounded and they don't fly anymore. And so when you're talking about instincts, I'm like, oh, you must be passionate about cooking all the time. And now that you're doing Pluck, I was wondering, do you even get a chance to go out there and just, work on that skill sets? And so thanks for sharing that.
That's such a good question. I mean,
Yeah.
and it is interesting because I am still passionate about food.
Mhm.
But what's really changed though is that I more and more think that we're getting into the weeds too much with the details. You remember that book back in the day, like Don't Sweat the Small Stuff? Do you remember
Mhm.
those books? I think it's a
Yep.
whole series. Like I more and more am like, I think that that's actually more accurate of how we should be looking at food. Yes, is 100% grass fed going to be better? Sure, sure. But does that mean that you should be stressed out and not eating out at restaurants because you cannot find 100% grass fed, because you really will be hard pressed to find it? Or just because you can't find organic, or just because you can't find specific things? And I think a lot of people do that, particularly in our circles. But I just wonder, is that the most conducive energy towards health? And what I mean by that is, so placebo effect, right? Placebo effect works. Like it's a factual scientific thing, right? That if you have a test group, one person has the actual medicine and another has a placebo, right? And a certain percentage of that group who get the placebo have the exact same results from the people that get medicine, right? So we know that placebo works to a certain point. And I'm more and more thinking that we're already living in a modern world where things are stressful, and so we're at a higher stress level than we probably ever ancestrally have been. Well, I know that people would argue, well, but if you're being chased by a wild animal, that's high stress, but you weren't under that stress 24 hours a day like most of us are, right? You had the fight and flight. Your kind of adrenals were only tapped so often, right? Because if they were tapped for long, it probably meant you were about to get killed, or eaten or mauled,
Mhm.
right? But for the most part, we had, spurts of extremities, but for the rest of our life, it was like joyful, hopefully, or it was more communal, or there was something a little more passive about it, hopefully. But I'm finding that more and more we're just constantly in this state of overwhelm. And that's why so many people have tapped adrenals, right? How many adrenal issues. And so more and more I'm thinking, like, if we kind of stop focusing on listening to other people around what diets we should be eating, and more focus on, well, what does my body need and want? Really almost like Bill Schindler has an amazing quote that he talks about. And as you guys have probably shared, he wrote Eat Like a Human. He's been on your podcast, but he's a professor of archaeology. So he has a quote that says, "We are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat." Well, there's like 7.9 million species. Like that's that is like crazy. That's literally crazy. Like, because we're a species, we're an animal too, and we're the only one that has lost touch with what we should be eating. And so I'm more and more trying to spread the word of, like, well, how do I support people in getting back? And I know it's not by talking about protein, carbs, and fats. You know what I mean? Like getting granular about things and talking about organic or pastured. Like it's just not. It's if anything, that's going to divide people, because when we talk about those things, we're basically saying that healthy is for the wealthy.
Mhm.
And what I want to do is like actually bridge the gap and try to show people, like, actually, if we just focus on our state, like the thing that we can control. So our being, like, in a sense, with mindful eating. So mindfully eating food is going to be more effective than the details of what that food is, in my judgment, these days. And it's absolutely something everyone can do. We can all change our mindset when we're going to eat, and actually imagine and believe wholeheartedly that the food we're about to put in our body is going to nurture and sustain and bring us health. Like we can all put that energy towards that food, and we can all, when we're even cooking that food, we can put our energy towards what the outcome that we want from that food. So when we're cooking that food, we can bring that joy and that health and that love into the cooking of the food. And then we also have the power to go to farmers markets to do it like you guys do, which is have your own farm. You then get to control how that food is grown, and you get to put that love and joy into the food that you're growing. And that energy exchange to me is what we really should be talking about, and not just like the details of the characteristics of the food.
I love that so much, Chef James Barry. One of the things that we do when before we eat is we pray, we have that intention, we have that gratitude before our food. But then when I learned about the work of Dr. Emoto and
The water.
the water,
Yep.
that's when it really struck a huge chord with me to realize that water, when touched with a seed, let's say a broccoli seed, before we were recording, we were talking about sprouting seeds, right? But like a seed can lay dormant for years. And the moment that water touches it, now the seed has this innate wisdom inside of it to know that it's ready to sprout. And that sprout, with that life that's brought forth, is one of the most nutrient dense things for us to eat. But it already has that recorded in there. And then I thought about, okay, so let's say we put that seed into the soil and we give it some water and we give it some sunlight. And being a farmer, being a gardener, even, there's so many failures that can happen from season to season, from month to month, from year to year, from day to day, right? And so one of the things that I always do when we with the kids is, when we plant something into the ground, we set that intention that whatever grows, we hope and pray that it grows and grows well to fullness, and that it's completely perfect for us when it's ready to harvest. But like, I hadn't realized that mindfulness that comes into play. I mean, growing up, we prayed about, bless the hands that prepared the food, but that was something that we just recited almost, right? It wasn't something that I truly understood until we started growing our own food, to cooking our own food. We make our own products. On the children have their own Joy and Jolie products, and we make our own salves. And when we make the salves, or when the children sell their milk products and they're creaming the milk, and if they are having a bad day, I'm known, like Tim will say, I'll tell them, step away from the product, step away from the milk, because I don't want you to put that energy to transfer into our food, because we are making healing, nourishing yogurt for our family, but also to 10 other families around us. And so this food is meant to be nourishment and healing for our family and others around us, that like, you need to be mindful of that energy transfer. And like, I know it sounds so woo woo, but it just, you just telling that aspect of like that intention and the mindfulness of eating is so true. And we should be talking about that, because that, just because we don't tangibly see it, we talk about grass fed, grass finished, but now people are asking me, well, what if I can't afford grass fed, grass finished bones? Someone asked me, I haven't had bone broth in 6 months because I haven't been able to afford it. To me, it's like, you can have, if you even have bone broth, but you can put that mindfulness in there, and you can say that this will be healing for me and my family. To me, that's it.
It is. And we know this. I mean, in a sense, that's why it's not woo woo, because this is actually proven. It's the woo woo is the judgment, it's the stereotype, but the reality is that, okay, take that water, the water book. I mean, they had a toxic lake and the monks stood around it and prayed, and they tested it before they prayed. They tested it after they prayed it, and it clearly could form crystals afterwards, whereas it could not before.
Right.
It's like anyone that learns a little bit about metaphysics, there is space in everything. Even though our hand can, tap on a desk and it feels solid, there's still space atomically under a microscope, a very, small microscope, right? Like a defined microscope, you could see that there's space in the atoms. And so energy flows throughout things. And so this idea that we have to follow this certain dogma of I mean, if a lake can be toxic and then people pray over it and it's no longer toxic, then what does that say about food coming from CAFOs? It's the same concept.
Mhm.
And no, like, is it ideal? Well, no, but it's still nutritious. And I think that's where people get messed up on, is they think that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation out there, first of all.
Mhm.
Our like when I look at a CAFO, for example, I am more concerned about how the animals are being raised than the fact that they're not getting 100% grass. Because to me, that's energy exchange,
Mhm.
right? So the way they're being raised is so unnatural. That's what concerns me, because they're in a stressed out state. And we know that if anyone that hunts knows this, is that if the animal is being chased, the adrenaline goes into the meat and it tastes different. It's not as good. It's kind of more firm. It's not as tender. Like, it loses its quality. So any kind of inhumane way of raising an animal is going to affect that meat. Now, it's not, you can still prey on it. You can still hope for the different energy. And I do believe that will help. But we're talking that physically, it's actually going to be, it's going to have adrenaline. It's going to have properties in it that are going to change how it cooks, the texture of it, things like that. So there's certain things you can't mess with. Like, if you overcook meat, you could pray all you want, it's still charred. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't change the outside properties of something, the structure of something. Oh, I'm sorry, because obviously they're saying that with water you can. What I mean though is the texture of that, right?
Mhm.
But what I'm like, that energy exchange that I think we're talking about is that it's also how you receive something.
Mhm.
And if I'm in a stress out state, then I'm probably not going to be able to assimilate those nutrients that I am eating, whether they're from a cave, from corn and soy fed cows or grass fed cows. It won't matter. And I used to always tell people when I was private chefing for them, I was like, look, if your body is not, like, if you're not digesting your food properly, if you're not making sure that your body is working optimally, then it doesn't matter what I give you. I could give you the best, most highest, most expensive food in the world, but if you're not digesting it properly, like, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Yeah, Chef James, we know firsthand Sophie's always in the garden, but I'm out tending to the livestock, and the energy just in dealing with the animals every day. From when I first started, I was a lot more panicked and I would want things done right away. I just, want it done right away. And the animal can feel my anger, my energy of trying to rush them into the process. And then through it, they end up going in circles, round and around, just further frustrating me versus if I just took my time and walked, slowly, patiently behind them and just kind of coaxed them through, then they'll actually do some, they'll actually listen to me. And to your point, we harvest a lot of our own animals. And I've noticed myself when I first started, the way that I harvested a turkey, because a turkey is way larger than a chicken, and the chickens I can process easily, and the meat tastes great and it's fine. But with the turkey, I was wondering why after I processed the turkey, it was just rock hard because it got all tensed up because I was traumatized. I'm sure the turkey was traumatized by it, and it's just and anyone who was watching was probably traumatized. But it's just I was like chasing after the turkey, and it was scary, and I should have learn from my elders out here, and use like a feed sack or something just to kind of calm it and they keep it in one place. And but to your point, the quality of the meat afterwards, it just showed after. And it was just a shame because it's like I want to be able to honor the animal, want to be able because we fed the animal the best, we knew we raised the animal with all the right intentions. But if we don't go all the way full circle and see through it to the end, and properly dispatch the animal, then it's like all for naught. And that was a very like costly lesson for me, and then something I didn't want to ever repeat. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
But I love that that's what you learned, right? I mean, we need contrast. We need it. If we don't have contrast, then we don't know how to change. We don't know what to change. And to me, what you experienced, literally experienced, is what most people out there are lacking, which is just the experience, the hands-on kind of one-on-one relationship with their food. And that's why so many people don't know what to eat or how to eat. I'm more and more just like I did was recently at this conference called Hack Your Health. Sophie was there with me, of course, and I did a talk though on basically how flavor can reconnect us to our ancestral knowledge of what we should be eating. And I basically talk about it from the standpoint of like, look, so Homo sapien is basically this similar body type we've had for all these years, and it hasn't changed that much, you know, back then. And yet, obviously, our food sources have changed. But what we did very differently then is like we were using like, so I imagine like back in the day, Homo sapien in a forest, they hear something drop, right? So first it starts with our hearing, and they turn, then they're using their eyes. They see a tree, they see, you know, where they look to where something dropped. They now see something hanging in that tree. They walk closer to it. They get it. They can now see even closer, and they see it's this plump, kind of colorful thing. They don't know what it is yet, but then they touch it and they have it in their hand. They can feel the plumpness, and there's clearly something inside it. It's kind of juicy, it seems, right? Then they take a bite. As they bring it closer to their nose, they're smelling, and these flavors are coming into this is all communication that's happening neurologically, right? And so through smelling it, they're starting to get this communication of like, oh, it smells sweet. It smells like something I might be able to eat, maybe, right? They take a bite. Now juices are running down their chin, and they're chewing, and through the mastication, the pulp of whatever they just ate is now going into their mouth, and the flavors are now entering and touching their taste buds and whatnot, and they're deepening, right? Because when we actually start chewing things, more flavor comes out. And then they go to swallow it, and it's like there's this whole like physical response to it where you almost feel like all your cells are awakening and coming alive to the nutrition that this product is giving you. Like, this is how our body was formed. Flavor in nature equaled nutrition. So this is what our body knows, and it informs on this process of using your eyes, your ears, your hands, your mouth, the sense of taste, like all these sensorial pieces that we have that are part of the human body are informing our brain and our nervous system of whether we should eat something or not. And what's throwing us off are these ultra processed foods that have tons of flavor, very manufactured flavor, but no nutrition. And so when I think about, well, okay, if we were to start focusing, creating our own food pyramid, how I would create it, and this food pyramid, I truly believe is applicable to everyone. It's doable for every person, no matter what you earn in a year, you know, what your salary is, doesn't matter. Like, anyone could follow this the pyramid I'm about to share, and will not only feel better, but you'll just thrive. You'll absolutely thrive. And it's how I would structure it is the very top of the pyramid would be just focus on real flavors, like flavors that are found in nature. So get rid of things that are synthetic flavors, and that could be artificial or natural. That doesn't mean anything, right? It's like those are fabricated flavors. So really try to find foods that have flavors that are actually found in nature. So that's the top of the pyramid. Then right below it, in the center of the pyramid, it is now just choose nutrient dense foods. So choose real foods that are ingredients versus have ingredients, right? Very simple. Just real food. And then below that, as the kind of like the the grounding factor to that entire pyramid, is just then consciously eat. Like, just be mindful when you're eating that food. Slow down. Like we talked about, do a prayer, take a breath, do something, say grace, something to get you to slow down when you go to eat. Do things like every time you eat, put your fork or your spoon down. Let yourself chew what's in your mouth first, then go back. And by doing that, you're actually now giving your body that time. Your body will start recognize the food it's eating, and B, you're giving your body the time and the communication to happen so that you can recognize when you're full or not. And it's so fascinating because our heads will start to play with us. And I'll share, even this morning, like, I made this smoothie, And you make the smoothie and you don't know exactly, am I going to get exactly to the cup, or or the glass, or am I going to go over the glass? But you just make what you make, right? And I poured it into the glass and I still had more. And I went to drink from the glass, and I probably drank maybe about 3/4 of the glass, and my body felt full. But I psychologically looked at the rest of the blender and I was like, oh man, I still have more. I think I need to finish this. And
Mhm.
I was like, well, that's interesting, right? Because I poured it into a very big glass, because I blended more than I should have or whatever. Like psychologically, I was literally telling myself, oh no, you got to keep going, even though your body is telling you you're full. And I was like, no, you guess what? I'm going to go ahead and stop. And
Mhm.
so it's stuff like that. Like you have to kind of realize that your mind is against you, because our mind is being affected by the marketing out there. Our mind is affected by how we were socialized, how we were raised, the
Mhm.
glasses we chose, the portions we normally get, like the size of the plates we chose, like all these things are psychologically preying on us. But the body is separate from that. The body will not lie to you. The body is your companion in this lifetime, and it will never leave you unless you die, right? That's the only time it leaves you. But it will never leave you while you're living, and it will always tell you what's working and not working. You just have to
Mhm.
listen. We all just have to listen to it, but we cannot listen to it unless we slow down.
That brings it back to what you were talking about with instincts from our 20s. I remember 20s, I was totally prone to listening to all the food marketing. 30s, I got a little bit smarter when I had kids. 40s, I wrote the cookbook when I'm just like, screw all of the rules and I'm just going to lean into the instincts. But to that point, James, I had a very, I, as a parent and as a mom who grew up as, in an immigrant family, I remember I have like so much trauma over being in trouble, just sitting there and finishing my fish and my rice in my bowl. And my parents would just make me sit there until I finish it. And, now when I think about all the things that we've learned about our instincts, right? And how we're raising our kids, I now have to think about how I'm parenting them. But it takes that time to make sure that I can enable them and empower them to lean into their conscious eating. If they're telling me that they're full, then that's it. I'm going to have to be okay with waste. And it's a little bit better that we have a farm now. We can feed it to the dogs or the chickens. But I try to be really mindful of this because I want them to know that. I do. I also have the same issue of, if I made a whole cup of coffee and I'm full, do I drink the whole thing because I brewed the whole cup? And all these things that I've had to slow down to really think about too. But again, it's me being in my 40s now and having to realize that connection with my body that no one taught us.
Well, well, yeah, no one did teach us, because we're also susceptible to the marketing. It's like, and we're all, you only know what you know, right? And so then when Time magazine, and I remember this happened, I think it was Time or one of the major magazines came out in, I think, the 80s, and they were like, wheat bread is healthier than white bread. And my mom was like, okay. And then we no longer got Wonder Bread. Now we got some kind of wheat bread. It was like, we're all so susceptible to these things. But ultimately, I think if we just try to, like, if it takes you 30 years to be kind of like 30 or 40 years to basically shut down and like only know what everyone's telling you and no longer kind of be your own, what, kind of no, like if you're not cognizant of what your own body needs and you're constantly looking outside yourself for 30 years, then you can't expect to listen to this podcast and to go like, oh, I really like what he's saying. Tomorrow I'm going to start being more more conscious about what I eat. And then you're just, don't expect that you're just going to arrive, right? It's like, it's a process. It's a process to disconnect, and it's a process to reconnect, and it takes time. But it needs to start somewhere. And I think that anyone listening that's like, I want to try this, I would absolutely say like, start with just taking a breath before you eat. Like, Start with those little things, or like when you wake up in the morning, just drink a glass of water. Like there's little things you can do to start to slow down. And you can even slow down by your food choices. Like, so something that people don't realize is like most of us stick with the same cuts of meat, with the same kind of basic principles of our meals. But if we actually just try something different, so we change the structure of the plate a little bit. So let's just say if you're someone who spoons rice onto the plate, well, instead of spooning the rice on the plate and kind of having this kind of mound or whatever, this kind of broken mound, like use your half cup measuring cup and form the rice into the cup, right? And then let that structure be on the plate. And I promise you, you will eat it slower, because now your brain has to think about what it is, and it kind of realign to like, oh, well, what's this? And you just kind of end up taking it slower. Same thing with meats. If you're typically someone who eats like a boneless steak, try eating a bone-in steak. It's going to slow you down. Try different cuts of meat. If you're typically a ribeye person, then try like a totally different cut that requires that you slow cook it, or, a brisket or something like that. It's going to, anything that changes a pattern is going to automatically slow you down, because your brain's going to be like, what is this? What am I know it's beef, but this isn't what you normally eat. You know what I mean? So there's little things you can do to just slow down and be more mindful of what you're doing. And it's got huge benefits. Like, not only will you digest your food better, you'll probably not eat as much, which goes to what you were saying. Like, you can actually take like something I more and more try to do is kind of practice that European way of having smaller portions. Like, instead of that first plate being the same for everybody, everyone gets a smaller portion. So that way, if then you don't have the waste, hopefully, right?
Mhm.
But then if you're still hungry, you just get more, and you get more based on what you think you can eat, versus that first plate of just assuming like you're going to go for gold, right? It's like going smaller. There's nothing wrong. It's okay to have two plates versus one. You know what I mean? But that's sometimes even psychological, particularly for women, right? They think like, oh, if I have a second plate, they're conditioned, men or women, but we're conditioned to think if I go back for seconds, then I'm being gluttonous or something like that. So you're constantly fighting socializations. You're constantly fighting the marketing, but that's okay. It's okay. We're human, and we're living in the world we're living in. And it's like, it's not about fighting that. It's just about picking and choosing where you can get control over the things that matter to you.
Chef James, what you just said, it was just, for me, it was earth shattering because it really resonated with me. Well,
This
what you started off with was funny because I'm like, it wasn't Wonder Bread to wheat bread. It was Wonder Bread to Iron Kids bread to wheat bread. But everything else, like portion control, we'll go if we go out to eat or something like that, which is very rarely, but she'll be like, honey, you need to try to just eat half of that and then put the other half away. For what? What are we putting the other half away for? Or the sandwich is gonna be soggy, that other half later
That's
on.
horrible.
And what you were just telling, like, these are practical tips that are like real life, the bone in steak that like I always like to eat a ribeye, but you're right, because I don't like to eat with the bone because I don't want to have
because it
to
slows you down.
I don't have
Maybe you
to
shouldn't
maneuver
scarf
it.
down your food.
Well, maybe you don't want to see me hold the bone up and try to okay. Anyways, but
But even then it would slow you down, even then, because
it, that,
you have to like, you
that's
know,
true. But it begs the question though. So these are like great practical tips that people can take, like taking a breath, slowing down what we're eating, or taking a smaller portion, smaller plate. But what about conventional food versus organic food for those that are like may not have the budget and they say it's only for the wealthy? What do you say to that?
well, it's the same thing like with fish, right? When it came out about the mercury in the fish, everyone's like, I can't eat fish, but the benefits of fish far outweigh that. For you're gonna have to eat sardines, and like you're gonna have to eat swordfish every single day to have true mercury poison. And the truth is if you have really high mercury, you might be getting it elsewhere too. You know what I mean? It's like you don't want to throw out, just like your friend who didn't do the bone broth. It's like you don't want to throw out these very therapeutic, very healthy foods just because of this idea of what you're afraid, out of fear or something like that. And particularly if it's unfounded fear, right? It's like you don't actually know you're going to get mercury poison if you eat too much. It's like you don't know, and you can always choose smaller fish. There's always things you can do. But what's interesting is like Rob Wolf and Diane, I'm forgetting her last name, but Diane is her first name. They wrote a book called Sacred Cow.
Mhm.
And
Such a good book.
in that book, they talk about how there have been studies done that show that the nutrition in the conventional cows is actually similar to grass fed. Now, I have heard other studies done where they said, no, 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 it's absolutely not true, that grass fed is way more nutritious. But here's the deal. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which is like, doesn't matter, because if you're not receiving that food well, if you're in a stressed out state, if your digestive system is not working properly, if your elimination pathways are not working properly, you're going to receive that food the way you're going to receive it. Doesn't matter what the quality of the food is. It matters more about your state. It's kind of like that idea of like, when you're raising kids or you're dealing with you're dealing with like a conflict. I'm sure you've heard this before. People are like, well, isn't that more common on you? Like where the common is more about like, why don't you just work on yourself? And then the issue that you're having with the other person will kind of shift because you're shifting. Like you got to start with as Michael Jackson saying, the man or the person in the mirror, right? It's like, we got to start there. And I really do believe that instead of worrying about whether it's organic, grass-fed, conventional, let's first get the piece. And particularly if it stresses you out to purchase 100% grass-fed because of your salary, how much you have. Like, we don't want that. You don't want more stress when you're eating food. You
Yeah.
want less stress. So I would say let's put that as the top priority, is like, how do we make our lives less stressful? And if it means buying, like, look, the bigger issue for people that, let's say, are concerned about their pocketbooks, the bigger issue is that many of them are spending their money on ultra processed foods. That's really the bigger issue. Like, whether you buy conventional meat or 100% grass fed is very, very like 2% problem. Like the majority of people are spending what they do have on the Coca-Colas, on the Oreos, on the bags of chips. And that's the stuff I'm like, let's worry more about that. Let's get those ultra processed foods out. And then let's see how much money you have. And even then, if it stresses you out to buy that $25 pound, ribeye, which it should, because that's crazy expensive for a ribeye, right? Then don't worry about that and just focus on joy and focus on, you know, relaxing when you eat, laughing, focus on the people you're around as you eat, and focus on them and the joy that those people bring you. Focus on feeling good as you eat it. That, put on some nice music, maybe a great podcast. You do whatever it takes for you to shift into that joyful state. And I promise you that what you eat, it will not matter. Everything going in your mouth will taste great and be good for you.
I love that. I love that so much. And one of the things too is, I know one of the tips that I like to give is try something to stretch out whatever that is. And this is just the way that I had to grow up with my family, being immigrant family. We had to take a whole broiler chicken that my mom would buy from an Asian farmer, and she would make it into 4 different dishes. And those dishes are now in the cookbook, and I talk about that. One of the feedback that I got from a client was, I said, your brisket, for example, that it's pretty costly now. Typically, we use it in our pho. And I had a comment from someone saying, that brisket is for my husband's barbecue. Like, he would kill me if I used it for anything else. And I said, well, try it. It could just be a portion of it. You don't have to use the whole slab of the brisket, but take little portions of it. So she did. She made pho and thinly sliced the brisket. So you can actually save more money by cooking differently, stretching it out. I know typically in like the American culture, we tend to make like one whole broiler chicken into a rotisserie chicken, and that's like the one meal. But in our culture, we've just had to, out of necessity, stretch out the beef or the chicken, whatever the protein is, just because that's just, a lot of it is made with other fermented veggies, or we use like sweet potato noodles or other carbs, but you can definitely do it without carbs. We do it with broth, but you stretch out the meat, stretch out your protein. If you don't want to buy conventional meat, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, though. It is more of the intention, the joy, the people that you surround yourself and eat with. But I also get a lot of feedback from people who are just die hard, you know, got to stick with the grass fed, grass finished, organic, clean, but you're going to stress yourself out. So if you're going to stick with that, then learn how to stretch out your budget, learn how to stretch out the protein into
To-
multiple dishes.
Totally. And well, and here's some tips on that. So you mentioned like thinly slicing. So one of the ways to thinly slice meat is to freeze it, right? You got to cut it when it's frozen or
Yeah.
slightly defrosted, but still very much firmer than it is when it's defrosted. The other thing, and I talked about this actually at that conference, and I talk a lot about this on podcasts, is like, you know, organ meats. Like, so right now when we slaughter an animal, about 50% of that animal is muscle, right? But the other 50% is all the offal and, the bone marrow and the parts of the animal that usually go to other industry and or get wasted. And so it's always interesting because to me, this is the definition of madness. So we don't eat the whole animal. Most people, I know those farmers that are listening are like, oh no, we eat the whole animal, but that's, you guys are the rarity, right? But most people are not eating the whole animal. They're just eating muscle. And then yet they're turning around and they're investing in supplements to supplement the vitamins and minerals they're not getting from their food. And I'm like, well, so the most nutrient dense parts of the animal are getting thrown out basically, and all we have to do is simply start eating that animal. So that's one. So if we just eat the whole animal, you'll find that you're spending less money elsewhere. Two is that same grass-fed, 100% grass-fed cow where the ribeye is $25. Well, that cow has a tongue. That cow has a heart, and they're not $25 a pound. They're like 7 or 8, sometimes 6, sometimes 4, right? Like they vary in how much they cost. And I guarantee you just start eating like more tongue or more heart, or which are two of the more muscle-based organs. They're closest to muscle meat. But like you start doing stuff like that and your bill will go down because it's not as expensive as the other cuts. But yet it's the same high quality.
Mhm.
So there's definitely, and then you guys have already talked about like meat shares are a really great way to kind of lower the cost. You can go in with other families. You can buy a quarter cow. There's so many options you can do around that. And absolutely make sure that when you're getting those meat shares that they're grinding some of those organs with the meat when they give you their ground meats. Like don't let any of it go to waste, because that's money. That's money left on the table.
So how did you get the idea for Pluck?
It's a mix of, well, as I mentioned before, the kids, like, so wanting to get, the nutrient dense foods into their diet, but do it effortlessly. Cause I feel like as parents, we're already working hard enough. Like, I don't want to have to work, with picky eaters. And like in our household, we make one meal. Like we don't do the whole 2-3 meals. They eat what they get kind of thing. So it's primarily that. And it's also kind of my sensibilities as chef. I've always kind of looked at things from outside the box. Like I'm always like even when I make ice cream, for example. So when I make ice cream, and this, if anyone wants to follow this, you'll end up making some of the best ice cream you ever had. But so basically, what I realize is that when I make fat, cream, cow's cream and cow milk ice cream, it leaves a coat on my tongue, fat coat, and I just didn't like that texture. I didn't like that feeling. And so I was like, well, let me think about this. And I was like, well, goat milk is a lot less fatty and it's a lot cleaner to digest. So I was like, okay, what if I use goat milk, but it's hard to find goat cream. So I was like, what if I keep the cow cream? So I basically mixed species. I did goat milk with cow's cream. And then I followed, the ice cream recipe the exact same as you would find it, just pick any recipe, but just switch out the cow's milk for goat milk. And it creates this very light ice cream that's easily digestible. And it's so good, but that's how I think. I don't think I'm not a Puritan around food. Like I really just think about like when I was thinking about organ meats, like how do I get organ meats into people's diets? Well, there's three major hurdles. It's like that taste that people associate with it. It's the sourcing. A lot of people don't even know where to source it or how. But even more importantly, they don't know how to cook it.
Yeah.
And so it's and which is also a texture thing, right? So I was like, well, how do I get over those hurdles? And really it came to me when I was thinking about, well, what's in a pate? So we have the organs that go into a pate, but then we're also adding onions. We're adding different herbs and spices. Well, wait a second. There's herbs and spices that are already dried. They're already shelf stable. Now I just have to figure out how to have shelf stable like organs. Oh, wait, we already have those. It's the freeze dried powdered organ meats that are in capsules. So I was like, well, what if I just combine these two very shelf stable products together? And then, of course, that had its own process of finding, what percentage of the organ meats made it so it with the spices made it so that you couldn't taste it. It didn't change the texture, all that kind of stuff. And so as I finessed it, I was like, wait a second, I have a shelf stable organ-based product that anyone can use. You can sprinkle, like even kids, like, because that's one of the biggest complaints with capsules is a lot of kids can't swallow the capsules.
Mhm.
It's like, but you can absolutely season anyone's food from popcorn to toast to meat to fish. I mean, literally put it on everything. And now every time pizza, like every time we use it, the kids are getting that microdosing the organ meats. And I'll just kind of share this piece since I'm on this topic too. But the other kind of thing that then came out when I created this was like, well, people are like, well, but how much am I really getting? And I was like, well, that's an interesting question. And that's a very American question because in America, it's all like go big or go home, right? It's all like about work hard, play hard. This is very kind of American mentality of like extremities. But the reality is the body doesn't really work like that. The body, when we get extreme, when we get too much of something, the body immediately evacuates it. Like that's why if you get too much protein, you have to pee. Your body just wants to get rid of things that when you're in extremities. And while we may think that we thrive on extremity, we actually don't. Like usually what it does is just maxes us out, overwhelms us, it burns us out, right? Anyone that lives in extremities cannot live there very long.
Mhm.
But when you think about what is the thing that moves our health the most, it's the things that are daily habits. And what is a daily habit? Well, a daily habit is something that doesn't dominate our life, that's not extreme, that's simple and easy, and something that we could do in micro amounts. So like brushing our teeth, we don't brush our teeth for an hour. We brush our teeth for 2 minutes, right? So these micro dosing of these daily habits is absolutely the thing that we can sustain in our lives, that our bodies can actually assimilate and actually use efficiently use, right? And so I'm like, we need to change our thinking on this because if I'm let's say using Lowry's all-purpose seasoning on my food, well, when I use Lowry's, I'm getting an extreme amount of salt because most seasonings are mostly salt that have some seasoning in them, and they do that because salt's cheap and they're trying to maximize their profit, right? Well, and then they also have Lowry's has some sugar in it. It has some anti-caking agents, and it also has seed oils. So right away, you're using something to flavor your food that is extremely salty and also might bring you flavor, but it's also probably hindering your health because it's got things in it that are not good for you. So just by switching, you're now getting micro amounts of organ meats that are completely like Mother Nature's multivitamin. We're not adding anything to them. We're not adulterating them. They are freeze dried and powdered. That's it. There's no flow agents, nothing, right? So this is truly Mother Nature's multivitamin. And then we're mixing it with organic spices and herbs. We're using Redmond real salt. So we're using these very like nutrient dense, natural flavors found in nature, right? And like you're now getting something you weren't before. And so I'm always just kind of I'm always kind of blown away that I created this, that I was the first to do it. I'm constantly blown away by that, and I do not take that for granted. And then I'm also really blown away by how how much feedback we're getting from people saying how it's helping them and how much they're benefiting from it and how much their kids love it. And it's just amazing because that's truly why I do what I do. Is like why I wanted to become a chef is because I wanted to help people with their health. That's why I left Tom Cruise, right? It's like I wanted to help more people. And so I will always be the one that's just blown away that I'll see people buying Pluck and I'm like, I don't know who that is. That's amazing. You know what I mean? Like that it's not a family member. It's like not
Yeah.
someone from my past. And I'm sure you're going through that as well with your cookbook and with your kids' products. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a non-family member and I don't know who they are.
It's funny.
Yet
The
where's they
irony is
buying this?
the family members aren't the ones that purchase either.
That's so true. You're right. They're the ones that, yeah, don't usually, like unconditionally support, which is absurd, right?
Yeah.
It's so funny.
But yeah, we love your
We
seasoning.
do. It's a saving grace because it's really hard for me to eat beef liver, and I know it's the most nutrient dense part of the animal. But thanks to you, I do love beef tongue. I've had how you prepared it; it's really good, and the beef heart, which is so huge, but it tastes just like meat.
Yeah.
But beef liver is so difficult for me to eat, and thankfully, I love using Pluck. We put it on our popcorn, and I was just laughing when you said go big or go home because I did try at the very beginning to just put a whole bunch of it. I'm like, I'm just gonna make up for all the liver I'm not eating and just oh my gosh, that was a mistake putting too much of it, but just a little bit goes a long way.
You
I'm
know,
like,
it's like you don't wanna burn out, and when we go extremes, like, to me, that's the kind of funniness of health, right? Is that, I like we talked about, I've been in this health business for 20 years. I feel like I've seen every trend come and go, but the one thing that doesn't change is just real food. So real food is the constant, and if we could just kinda make that the benchmark, like, just make it real food. Your body will tell you if the real food portions and the sizes and the amounts that you're doing, that if whether that's right or wrong. Your body will inform you of that. But your mind has to make the decision just to buy real food. And obviously you can't really do that if you're eating out because most restaurants there, they're trying to make money, and the way to make money is to have cheap ingredients. A lot of them purchase from places like Restaurant Depot where the food is already pre-made and it has lots of additives and shelf stabilizers and just bad stuff in it. And so it's pretty hard to be healthy if you're eating out. Now, I will say though that if anyone, who has a farm, because most like you guys probably, have lots of beef livers left over and things like that. So you could make your own pluck, and I'll tell you, like, what you need really is it helps to have a freeze dryer because if you can dehydrate it, but you really need it to have very little moisture, and the freeze dryer will remove more moisture. And then also the texture is a little bit better when you freeze dry it because the dehydrated one, it becomes a little tougher.
Mhm.
But if you have a freeze dryer, you freeze dry the organs you want to use. You could definitely just start with liver, and then you just want to powder that, and you can powder, once it's freeze dried, you can powder it in like a Cuisinart. You don't need anything complicated. And then you take that powder and then you add whatever seasonings you want. And what I typically do is I follow the ratio of, like, you start with about 10% and then go up from there and see what your palate likes. So start with, let's just say if you're doing, like, I guess I would start with like a tablespoon of organ meat to maybe a half a cup of seasonings. And then I would just see how it goes from there. Like, then keep going up a teaspoon at a time. And you'll find that you kind of have to stay somewhere between like 15 and 20%. Like if you go too much further than even 17, 18%, you'll start to taste the organs in
Mhm.
the seasoning. Now, if you don't mind that taste, then great. You should go up to 20%. But if you're someone who's sensitive to that, then you just pull it back and let the seasonings be the dominant flavor and let the organs just, kind of provide this like low level depth, because what organ meats provide is an umami and a depth. And so it just kind of, you have a little bit of a taste, but it won't be too strong if you keep that percentage down. But what you'll get is that, and this is what we find with Pluck at least, is that when people add it to their food, they actually say my food tastes better. And
Mhm.
it's because the umami is a unique flavor and it's brightening the other flavors. And then it also brings a depth to that food that wasn't there before.
And that's what I love about Pluck seasoning so much is that we rarely use any other seasoning because of the umami flavors, and especially with Asian cooking, that's why people love Asian food, is because of the natural umami in our flavorings. But a lot of the seasonings out there, Lawry's included, but other ones use what MSG,
Yep.
which is chemically made in a lab, or they use other things like yeast extract, and they
Which
hide
is usually a way to hide MSG too. Yeah.
right, and they hide these things, and it's just been like that's why we wrote the cookbook, was just so that, how do we recreate these flavors without having to use anything that's chemically processed? And so
When we talk about, you know, extremities, right? Well, most people's palates are blown out. So a lot of people don't realize this. So like in the US, we skew towards salty sweet. Most of our ultra processed foods are all skewed in that. If it, like I look at food as color, right? So flavors are colors, right? So let's say salty sweet is blue and red. So all our foods are blue and red. But if you want to incorporate, the yellows and the greens and the purples, like you got to explore the sour, the bitter, and the umami. You got to explore those, and you don't have to go all in. You just have to first of all pull back on how many salty things you're eating or how many sweet things you're eating, and then start to slowly introduce those other flavors. And you can even do them like simply adding a little kraut juice, cultured vegetable juice
Mhm.
to the product. Like you don't have to go crazy. And even GAPS talks about this a lot. Is they just say when you're first introducing it to a child, you just do the juice and you only add a little bit, and you let that palate start to expand and recalibrate. Because anyone, I think everyone can identify with this. Like if you buy a bag of chips in the grocery store, you really take, and it has to be a flavored bag. You really only taste the first 3 chips. Every chip thereafter, you're just chasing the crunch. You don't taste the flavor anymore because it's so extreme, the flavors, that your taste buds are blown out. They can't handle more flavor.
Mm.
And so it's so blown out that you're now just chasing the texture, the crunch.
Mhm.
And then of course you're not getting any nutrition, so your body doesn't know when to stop. So that's why we finished the whole bag, right? But
Yeah.
if we just kind of like pull out these foods of our diet, like when I had that meal delivery service in LA, we had a program that was called the Sugar Control Detox. And what it is that we would, for 2 weeks, we would pull out certain foods. It was really like an elimination diet. So we pulled out sugars, we pulled out anything that was really high in sugar. So like you could have fruit, but you could only have raspberries, blueberries, and blackberries. You couldn't have strawberries or anything else because it was all too sweet. We pulled out alcohol. We pulled out dairy. We pulled out all the common allergens: wheat, dairy, and soy. We pulled out anything that converted into sugar in your blood too fast, like some of these simple starches, right? These simple carbs. So we pulled those out, like potatoes, pastas, rice. We pulled all that stuff out, and we only gave them like sweet potatoes or like spaghetti squash, like things that are more resistant starches, parsnips, what else? Like rutabaga,
Yeah.
like we did things like that. And then we gave them good healthy fat, like ghee. We wouldn't do butter since I had dairy, but we would do ghee, we would do coconut oil, we'd do animal fats. And then we would give them animal protein or fish protein or poultry protein, right? So we would do any of those. And in 2 weeks, the person's palate completely recalibrated so that they can now taste the sweetness of a strawberry, for example. Like, so when
Mhm.
they ate their first strawberry, they actually tasted how sweet it naturally is. when they had a glass of wine, they tasted how sweet that wine is and how they couldn't even finish a whole glass
Hmm.
in 2 weeks. So that's how fast our body is so miraculous. Our body is willing to change and will go with what we do, but we have to give it space, and we have to remove these stimulants, these things that are extremities in our diets out, and kind of simplify it for a little bit, and then you get to taste things for what they really are. And I promise you, it's hard to go back because you're like, oh, I don't need to have that cookie anymore because the strawberry is plenty sweet enough. Like, you know what I mean? So suddenly you're more attracted to this real food.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We had to eat out with some family here locally, and we're talking like East Tennessee, so it's not all that great, the choices that we have. And we tried to keep it clean. I just said some steak, and then there was an item on the menu as a side of steamed asparagus. And I thought that was pretty clean. I can't remember where we ate. Was it Long, Longhorn?
Lone Star.
Lone Star
Mm.
Steakhouse, and I was like, oh, we're already struggling with going in there anyway. So here we are. I ate it, and I really thought that I could just eat this asparagus. It was one of the most saltiest things I've ever had. I had to dip it into the ice water that we had just to rinse
Oh,
off the seasoning, and it still was very salty on the inside. And I try not to say anything because I look around and everybody seems to be having a grand old time. I mean, the restaurant is full, packed full of people. But at the very end, my mom was like, "You need to say something." And I'm like, "Well, everybody else seems to be eating here just fine. It's obviously us because we don't eat out anymore." But I gave the feedback at the end to the waitress, and I told her, I said, "You'll save a lot more money not using all this seasoning, all this salt. It's not clean salt. It's not real salt either. I'm sure it's just table
yeah.
white salt." So, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
said, like, you're contributing to a lot of the heart disease that a lot of the people here must have. And she said, when I first started here, I tasted it too. And it was way heavy on the seasonings, is what she called it. She said it was seasonings. But it's hard because she said everybody seems to be fine with it. And she thought she was crazy as well to even bring it up. But she says, I shop at the farmer's market. I try to eat clean. So everybody else who's used to eating out or eating processed foods, you're right, their taste buds are completely blown out. I just didn't realize it was a thing, but it is going to contribute to a lot of health problems.
Well, I'll give 2 examples. So growing up, I grew up on Skippy peanut butter, and anyone that knows Skippy's ingredients is it's basically a candy bar in a butter form, in a whipped form, basically. It's got lots of sugar, it's got hydrogenated oils, but I didn't know any different. Like that's what I thought peanut butter was. And then I remember I was at a friend's house who had Laurel Schroeder's peanut butter, and that one is just peanuts and salt. And it even separated the oils of the peanut would separate from it. And I was like, what's that? And I looked at it, I'm like, that's weird, and they mix it together, the oil and the peanuts. And then I tried it. I'm like, oh, that's so gross. And little did I know that actually that's what peanut butter is, right? And so the more I would then go over to the house and I would try it, I started to realize and started to taste it differently. And as I pulled Skippy out of my diet or my own, got the other one, I then really started, I'm like, oh, this is what peanuts taste like. This is what peanut butter really is, right? And it was only though through me pulling out of the other one and really allowing that new kind of like simpler flavor to be the go-to. It still took like a week or something for me to finally taste it, but I had to be willing to go there. Like you have to first acknowledge like that the asparagus is too salty. Like if you can't acknowledge that or even be willing to then try the asparagus without all that salt, then you're not going to be allowed to you're not allowing yourself to change the taste buds because it's not like you just like anyone that's eating the ultra processed foods that then just suddenly jumps to the natural, they'll think the natural food is gross. It's the same thing like someone who's drinking soda all the time. When they taste water tastes gross,
Mhm.
Mm.
right? But water is what we should be drinking. So as you pull back from the juices from the sodas and you start to just drink water, you start to realize, oh no, this is actually what my body craves. the other stuff is crazy sweet and should be minimalized, in my diet. But I'll share this story. When I was in LA many years ago, I was hired to help develop the menu for this restaurant concept. And the women that were going to be opening the restaurant, how we worked together was they wanted to show me like the pinnacle of what I needed to do. Like, so like, let's just say they wanted to have a roasted potato on their menu. Well, they first had to show me what is their favorite roasted potato in LA so that I could either match it or do better.
Wow.
So they took me and we went all over LA eating their favorites of all these different things. It was really quite fun.
That's awesome.
But I remember we went to this Thai restaurant in Long Beach that had these roasted potatoes. And they were like, these are the most amazing roasted potatoes. Wait till you try them. We opened the door to this restaurant and I just am hit with this whiff of this bitter kind of sour oil smell of burnt oil and just like, like bad fried oil. And I immediately said, like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is not going to be good. There's no way this is going to be good. But I sat down and I was respectful and whatnot. And they ordered the potatoes and they served, and the potatoes tasted just like that oil that I smelled in the air. They were bitter. They were overly salty. There was something rancid about it in my taste buds. And they tasted and they're like, what do you think? Isn't it amazing? And I was like, actually, I think it's horrible. And they're like, what? And I explained to them, I'm like, you just can't taste it because your taste buds are so blown out, like, or you're so used to this that you don't know what a real fried potato can taste like, one that's cooked in duck fat, for example. Like they don't know what that really can taste like. And so I said, here's the thing, let me cook for you for 2 weeks and then we'll come back. And I did that. So we cooked they did things the way I did them, freshly made, everything. And we went back and I didn't go with them when they went back. They went back on their own and they reported back to me. They said, you're right. It's disgusting. And they're like, we couldn't taste it.
It's crazy. I mean, I was just in California last week after our time at Hack Your Health, and my mom and the children and we just went to my old stomping grounds, ate at our favorite restaurants. And I kid you not, nothing tastes good anymore. Yet people are waiting out the door, all these nice restaurants that we used to like. So people are eating there and yet nothing tastes good anymore. And I'm starting to think that it's us. And what you're saying is our taste buds have just come back because we can't eat out where we are, and we are raising our own food. The quality is much better, but I just never, it's hard for us to put two and two together because these are places that I mean, it's original owners from back when I lived in San Jose, 30, 40 years ago, and nothing tastes good.
But it could be, like you said, the sourcing. It's like there's some famous European chef and he was like, 88% of gourmet cooking is like sourcing. It's just knowing
Yeah.
what to buy, the quality, like buying things that are ripe, buying things that are locally made, things like that, making sure that because if you're buying things where they've been allowed to grow on the vine or off the tree, or
Yeah.
like if you allow for that, then it's going to be already very nutritious. It's going to be fully formed in flavor. You don't have to do much to it. Like it's already there.
It's true.
And in the finest local restaurants, they barely do anything. It's all about their sourcing of their food. And same thing with like a really great, healthy, humanely raised cow,
Yeah.
grass-fed, 100% grass-fed raised cow. It's like the meat will taste amazing and you barely have to grill it. All you do is put a little salt, maybe finish it with Pluck, and it's amazing. And they didn't age it. They didn't do tons of stuff. They didn't have to. It's just really, really good. I mean, I'm just a real fan of that. Like that, we have to kind of look at these things and not accept everything at face value. We have to realize that first of all, eating out it's impossibly healthy. But two, that whatever state you're in, whether if you're feeling overweight, if you're feeling like you're stuck in a rut, it doesn't matter. Like that your current state, if you're not fully thriving, then you can do better, first of all, but that also everything is malleable. Like anything can change. You just have to be willing to change it. And you have to be willing to give it enough time to change. We cannot expect to snap our fingers and like the taste buds that have been developed for the last 20 years from what you've been eating are suddenly just going to change overnight. Now, everything's going to taste amazing that's not made, ultra processed, wise. It's like, no, ultra processed food's going to still taste. If that's your primary diet, then everything that's ultra processed is going to taste amazing. And anything that's not is going to taste horrible. But that doesn't mean it's good for you, because your body is telling you that. Oh, that's what I was going to say actually, is like, so here's some other tips on like how you can listen to your body. Because we've been talking about listening to it, when we're portion size and we're eating and all that stuff, but it happens even when you're at the grocery store. Like I always tell people, like, notice, like when you're going down the grocery aisle and let's say you're in your head, you're like, oh, I'm going to grab this. Right. And as you go to grab it, does your grip fail? Like, are you struggling to get it off the aisle, out of the aisle? Does
Wow.
it fall out of your hand every time you try to grab it? Do you notice your stomach starts to gurgle or that you pass gas? Like, do you notice that there's actually like almost a muscle response to what you're trying to do?
Hmm.
That's your body telling you this is not going to be good. And like, I'll go try a new restaurant. Like we're gluten-free and we found some gluten-free bakery here in Portland. I'm sorry, in Massachusetts. I used to be in Portland. But in Massachusetts, and this bakery is phenomenal. Like it's truly for gluten-free. It really is amazing. But we found it, we tried it, and that night I totally was gassy. I was like, okay, so this is my body telling me that whatever, yes, it's gluten-free, yes, it tastes good, but gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy. You know what I mean? It just means it's gluten-free. And so they're probably using starches, potato starches, or different guar gums, different things to bind that gluten that my body doesn't like. So I had a great time eating there, but I'm going to listen to that response over, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to, yes, it was good going in, but if it's not good going out, then that's what I'm going to listen to, because that's my body's response.
I love that. Those are great tips to share. We've had such a great time just talking through so much about the importance of eating well and living a nourished life. I just want to thank you for your time, Chef James. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, sure. Yeah. If you want to get some pluck, you can go to eatpluck.com. We also have a really great recipes. Like you'll find tongue recipes, you'll find heart jerky recipes, just so many chicken hearts, chicken, all different species. And then look for us on all the socials. We're at Eat Pluck for Instagram, and then I'm at Chef James Barry as well. And we'd love to hear from you. We have lots of kind of value adds, from recipe booklets to, as I mentioned, the recipes, to podcasts, kind of sharing different information. So we have lots of ways to help people without you even needing to buy. So anything we can do to just kind of help you move your health, reach out, let us know. We're happy to provide that, because that's ultimately what we're here to do.
And I have loved doing events with you too, James. It's been so much fun. So thank you for taking me along
Yeah.
the ride.
And we normally don't get, at least I don't get to spend this much time talking with you.
I
And
know, right?
I actually learned
Special.
quite a bit. So thank you so much. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners learned a lot. And we do have a coupon code, right?
Yes, we do have a code for 15% off of Pluck. If you go to eatpluck.com and punch in the code SPRINKLE, you'll get 15% off. We just personally bought 2 really large original Pluck spice bags, and we use it for everything, all over our eggs, all over our pate now, but also popcorn.
Yeah, we have the large bags right now, and we have 4 flavors basically. The zesty garlic, which is AIP for anyone that's sensitive to seeds and nightshades. We have the original, which is what you bought. That's our first product and probably our best seller. And then we have spicy mild, which is a version of the original but has cayenne and slightly different uh, levels of the ingredient, the amounts of the ingredients. And then we have pure, which is just the organ meats. There's no salt, there's no seasonings. And pure is kind of cool for those people that are doing like smoothies. You can even put it in your pet food if you want to help them get more micronutrients and or help them eat their food. They go like cats and dogs go crazy for this. And I use it even when I'm making ground meats or sauces. I'll just throw it right in the sauce, and with the ground meat, I'll mix it in. So it's just a way that the pure one is purely for increased nutrition. The other three will give you microdosing of the nutrition with lots of flavor.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna have to pick up an extra bag of that pure.
Yeah, I kind of just I like adding pure when I know, like particularly when it's four of us, like then you can just kind of like increase the nutrition load
Yeah.
to the flavor. Yeah, because Pluck is all about the gateway. Like we're not trying to be like, we don't necessarily want people to stop with Pluck. We want you to, empower you to make organs and to go beyond just the seasoning. But you need to start somewhere. And if organ meats are kind of the gateway to nutritional abundance, I would say Pluck is the gateway to organs, because it's just, we make it so easy. But
Mhm.
you can always go beyond that. And most people do once they start to recalibrate their palate to accept organ meats, which Pluck will help you with. You'll find that you'll actually start craving some. Like chicken hearts are a really great next stage because they're very mild and they take on flavors really well, and you can chop them up so they don't look like a heart. As we mentioned, the tongue is a really great one because it's closest to the muscle meat, takes on different flavors, heart as well. And then liver. Like when we were at that event, we made, remember the
Yeah, the
liver
pate.
pate. And what was so fascinating, I don't know if you saw that, these four people were standing around afterwards. We had a ton of pate left over after everyone sampled, and they were wanting to eat more. And they were like, "Oh, I guess you need to take it." I'm like, "No, you don't understand. It's going to get thrown out. So if you want it, go ahead." And four of them took spoons and just stood there and they ate the whole thing. They chowed down on it. And I was like, "Have you guys
Wow.
ever, like, do you guys normally eat pate?" And they're like, "No, we never have."
Yeah.
And I was like, "This is incredible. Like, you guys just ate that like it was pudding."
Yeah.
Wow.
It was incredible. Like, Tim, they all were like, "That was so good." And it
Wow.
was so, like, I feel so good after eating it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the power of not only organ meats, but also cooking them properly, which is what,
Yeah.
Sophie and I showed them how to do.
Yeah, and it was embarrassing, but my eldest daughter, she went up there and she was helping me clean up. I hope you didn't see it, nobody else saw it, but she was licking the spatula clean. She loved it so much.
Wow. See, that's so cool. Like that thrills me when I see people shifting their perspectives and opening people up to eating whole animal. Like that's truly why I'm in it. Like I think there were like 80 people at that cooking demo or something like that. And I really feel like we literally changed their entire lives. Like they all left going like, "Oh, tongue actually tastes good." Like Tim did that first time. Or like, "Oh, liver pate." Like because basically what we did, everyone listening, is we did liver and tongue, but what we did was we gave them raw liver, we gave them properly cooked liver, so it's not overcooked, and then we made pates because I wanted them to taste the different ways of doing it and how cooking it change the texture, changes the flavor. And I wanted them to decide which one their body responded to. And everyone was willing to go on the ride.
Mhm.
And it was so cool because I would say everyone left there realizing that one of those ways or multiples of those ways worked for them.
Right.
And they didn't know that before.
Yeah. I mean, even the frozen raw liver, that was exciting to see people just chow down on that, just to be willing to try it.
Totally, right? And when it's coming from a humanely raised, 100% grass fed, properly, fed animal, it's like it is healthy. Like if the animal's healthy, it's healthy.
Yeah.
Like that's another thing. We could probably have a whole podcast on just like phobias, and myths about all these things, of like pasteurized milk and why we even have to do that, and all that stuff.
That'd
That's
be a good
definitely
one.
podcast number 2 with
Yep.
you.
Yeah, seriously. But thank you guys for having me, and it's always a joy seeing you guys. And I know I'm seeing you soon
Yeah.
That's right. In
at another
Idaho.
event.
Yeah, we'll see you at the Modern Homesteading Conference next week at Coeur d'Alene in Idaho.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Is this going to come out before then?
I will put it
Yeah,
out.
we'll put it out before
Okay.
then,
Well,
Yeah.
and
anyone listening to it, and if you hear it before that event, and make sure to come by because So Sophie will be selling cookbooks. We'll have Pluck things to try, and I think it's going to be a great event. This is your first time going, right?
Yeah, first time.
Yeah, me too. But I just instinctively know it's going to be great. It's just going to be an awesome event.
Yeah, I work with Melissa K. Norris, and she's amazing to work with, top notch, and all the stuff is great quality content. So I know it's going to be great. So many people who have vended with us at other events have told us this is their favorite event to go to over others. So I'm really excited.
Oh, that's going to be great.
All right. We'll
All
see
right.
you there.
We'll see you
Yeah.
there.
Thanks so
All
much.
right. Thanks.